Hi, everybody. Welcome to a thrilling episode of Sneaky Geek. There's thrills. There's probably not chills. There's bills?
I hope not.
Not the bills you're thinking of. Not costing bills. The Buffalo Bills.
The Buffalo
We've invited
Bills.
the entire
We got the whole team
of Buffalo Bills.
Let's
right
go,
here.
Buffalo!
Okay.
Is there a Journal of the Wills?
Oh, we got
bringing
thrills.
it
We got
around.
chills. We got wills. That was so good. I wish I had started with that.
Yeah.
Well, everybody listening at home, I'm leaving that in, so you get to hear how John made this episode better and I failed. Anyway, shout out to the Buffalo Bills for sponsoring this episode. They did not. They have no idea who we are. Anyway, this is the point where we play the theme song. So do the theme song thingy.
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Okay. You're supposed to sing the theme song.
Oh, that was a good theme song.
Ah, it sounded exactly like it always does.
Work orchestra. Yeah, that was great.
Thanks to Skylar Johnson for our sweet theme song. Anyway.
Is it sweet?
It is a sweet
Heyo.
song. Puns.
Welcome to the Pun Podcast.
Yes, welcome to Sneaky Pun, where we sneak puns in all the time. But not there, because I couldn't think of one, and I really wanted to. We'll workshop it later.
Where's Nicole?
Right? Nicole will have puns for us.
She's the pun queen.
So we are here today to talk about the High Republic. And no, not that bougie new pot store that's over one city over from yours because your town doesn't allow weed. We're talking about the new era in Star Wars. And today with us to talk about Star Wars, somebody we've been trying to get on this podcast for approximately 52 episodes.
Long time.
We have John Hazlett.
Hello, everyone.
Yay.
John!
Bryce, Brian.
We're so excited to have you here because you are a font of knowledge, a wellspring of information when it comes to so very many things, as you have proven to me over the, get this, John, approximately 20 years of knowing each other.
He came to this knowledge, or this realization earlier today, and he's like, I don't like that.
Yeah, I was honored and sad.
I've known Bryce since he was freshly minted as an adult.
I think we met when I was in high school because I popped into the fencing club when Ethan was teaching.
Yep.
So that is even less, like I wasn't even freshly minted. I was still,
the first time
in a dye.
Volunteered your age, you were 18. I'm not sure exactly how long that was, like where your birthday fell in the scheme of that, but yeah.
Well, that's super important information for everybody listening at home. I'm glad you're keeping track of this. Anyway, John and I have known each other for a very long time. And when I first met John, I did not realize just how knowledgeable he was about so very many things. So very many things. And one of those things that he happens to be extremely knowledgeable about is Star Wars, specifically the expanded universe, also now referred to as Legends since the Disney buyout. John, why don't you lay your credentials on us?
Well, I've got my start with Star Wars. What got me into Star Wars was all the way back. I was probably about 3 years old, and they did a thing called The Making of Star Wars Return of the Jedi on TV, and there was all this funny, weird stuff. And I was like, well, this is cool. Let's watch this Star Wars thing. So eventually Star Wars came on TV. There was no Jabba the Hutt in it, and there was no speeder bikes, and I was really confused. But it was still a really good movie, and I enjoyed it. And there was
Really?
Because it was Star Wars.
Because it was Star Wars.
It was only years later that I finally saw the actual movie that was being shown in that making of featurette on TV. But then, I was just kind of a fan for a while. And then in the early 90s, I came across a Guide to the Star Wars Universe 2nd edition. And was like, oh, there's more to this than just the movies. And very shortly thereafter, one of my friends was like, hey, we've got this new role-playing game, the Star Wars role-playing game. You'll love it. And they were right. I loved it. And so I wound up
Very
buying...
cool. What was your class?
Oh, that system didn't have classes. It had optional templates you could use, so you could be like a brash pilot or a quixotic Jedi or a kid or a Wookiee.
Could you be a Bothan spy?
Eventually you could. It wasn't one of the original templates, but because the system was so much more modular than like the race and class based systems that you see in like D&D and whatnot. You could really build a character even if it wasn't something that was specifically designed. Yeah, I came in the second edition. My understanding is that the first edition was a little bit less flexible in that. But regardless, it was a great game, and I spent many, many days in my youth playing it with my friends, having all kinds of weird adventures that were Star Wars, but also very much not.
Right on.
And then but there was all of this deep lore that came with these role-playing books, and eventually I branched off and started reading some of the novels that were referenced in these books.
Yeah.
And
what was the first one you read?
The first novel I read was Heir to the Empire.
Oh, nice.
Way to just start off with the best. Like, let's see, I'm going to explore the extended universe here. I'm just going to go for the pinnacle of expanding the canon.
I waited all the way until 1999 before reading my first novel. I saw plenty of them in stores.
Oh, wow.
But I just was like, nah, there's other stuff to read before that. And then I saw the cover for Vector Prime, and it mentioned in the cover matter Mara Jade Skywalker. And I was familiar with Mara Jade through the role-playing materials because they'd done supplements and stuff that included information on her. But I had that little record scratch moment of, oh, wait. I need to find out exactly what was going on here to take her from a girl who I knew kind of wanted to kill Luke Skywalker all the way to Mrs. Skywalker.
To his wife?
Mrs. Skywalker.
Yeah.
So I read the Thrawn trilogy, and I read one or two other novels in between, and I'm kind of forgetting which one it was. And then I read the Hand of Thrawn duology, which sets up the marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And then I just dove into the New Jedi Order from there.
Oh, shoot. Right on. I didn't realize you got into a little bit or later than I did.
Yeah, when it comes to the actual narrative material, I was kind of a latecomer and had to play a bit of catch up. But I was familiar with a lot of the story beats from all of that because of role-playing game supplements and
and it's cool because I know at the time with the role-playing games, that was largely where a lot of the expanded universe kind of got written as well.
It was. When Timothy Zahn was first writing his novels, he got basically a care package from Lucasfilm saying, here, see how much of this stuff you can use in your stories. And he at first was like, I don't want to have to use all this other weird stuff made by a game company. And then he was like, actually, a lot of this stuff is pretty good, and it can save me from reinventing the wheel on a bunch of different things.
Yeah. And that was in 1990, 1991, because I think Heir to the Empire was out in 91 or 2?
Yes, so it would have been a little before that because of lead times and publishing and stuff.
Oh, right, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
That's crazy because that means I read my first Star Wars novel before you read your first Star Wars novel.
Probably true.
I'm far, I mean, granted, you had all of the supplemental material for the role-playing game,
which is huge.
You had a bigger knowledge of it before then, but mine was that young reader book with the guy who's pretending to be the son of Emperor Palpatine with the third eye and his
that's the Galaxy of
the
Fear?
Jedi Prince series.
Jedi Prince, yes.
Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mrs. Lemon, in my 5th grade teacher, had a copy of that, and we were doing this partner reading activity, and so me and my buddy Charles read it, and I absolutely fell in love with that modified medical droid that became an assassin.
Oh yeah.
And I drew that guy on every other sheet of paper in my notebook if I could. I thought he was so freaking cool looking.
Yeah.
I probably still somewhere in a box have a couple of those sketches from back in the day. But that's wild. But then if you dove in, and you dove in hard.
I dove in hard.
Sorry, Brad, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Fast forward a couple of years. I'm still role playing. I'm now role playing with some of Wizards of the Coast materials.
Oh yeah.
I'm still taking in the novels pretty heavily. And just before episode 3 comes out, someone somewhere mentions that there's a new wiki encyclopedia devoted entirely to Star Wars. And this was when Wookiepedia, which just celebrated its 19th birthday, was about a month old.
Wow.
Oh, that's awesome.
Ground
so
floor.
I went there and I was like, oh, this place is barren. Some of this is so little material. I'm not gonna stick around. I'll just well, maybe I'll edit this article a little bit. Maybe this is just
That's how it
this
starts,
is just
man.
worded so poorly. I can fix this. They really could use an article on the Tishar. They're my favorite alien species. Maybe I'll write something up on that. Okay, maybe I'll write a little bit more on that. And then before I knew it, I was deeply embedded in Wookiepedia.
Right on.
And
That's cool.
eventually I became an administrator and then a bureaucrat, which is an administrator who's given the authority to elevate other users to administrators or administrators to bureaucrats.
That's so cool.
We have the authority, the technical power, but it's all couched in bureaucracy, so that power is only used to carry out the
will of the Force
of the site.
Yeah. Same thing,
And I stayed in that role for basically better part of a decade. I only stepped down after the Legends announcement.
Yeah.
That wasn't my primary reason for leaving. I had a bunch of real life commitments that were keeping me away from the website.
Mm-hmm.
And there were cultural elements to Wookiepedia that had kind of soured me on some of what was going on there.
Gotcha.
But also, well, the Legends announcement for someone who is deeply enmeshed in Legends was demoralizing.
A little heartbreaking.
So for those of you who are at home and don't know exactly what we're talking about here because you skipped our various other Star Wars episodes, Disney bought out Lucasfilm for
$4 billion in change and stuff.
Yeah, and in doing so, they made this Legends announcement that you speak of, this infamous Legends announcement, which is, John, why don't you explain that for those who aren't aware?
Well, naturally, with the desire to make new movies set after the original trilogy with top-name directors and top-name talent, they didn't want to tie the hands of the creators with all of this 20-plus years of lore that had been built up over all that time. So they decided that they were going to stick to the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the Clone Wars TV show, all of which definitely had Lucas's fingerprints and were
he was heavily involved the whole time.
Involved with all of them, as opposed to everything else where either they weren't sure what his involvement was, or it was basically a rubber stamp on something that someone else had done.
Yeah, like with the games and the comics and a lot of the books.
Exactly. There's some debate as to how much he was involved with any of that, and particularly with the TV movies, like the Ewok movies and the Ewok.
Oh yeah,
the Caravan of Courage.
Exactly. Like there's not very good record of his involvement from what I understand, and so they decided those would be kind of shuffled off to the side, and that the only things they'd be keeping were the theatrical movies and the Clone Wars TV.
Clone Wars, yeah.
And then, of course, the German disco special.
Well, yeah, but that goes without saying.
We all know is super canon, obviously.
So,
and the holiday special, of course.
I mean, yeah. Itchy is 100% like George's greatest creation. He's said so multiple times.
Yes,
There's no one greater than Itchy.
So, anyway, just to wrap up my my credentials here. At the time, this is again in the mid-aughts, StarWars.com had a pay section called Star Wars.
Oh, that was Hyperspace, right?
That's the one, Star Wars Hyperspace.
Yeah. I think I subscribed for like a month or two. I talked my parents into being okay with me spending a little bit of money just to see these cool articles. Sorry, not to jump ahead, but that was totally a thing.
That was totally a thing. And one of the benefits to membership for a part of it, before it became, I guess, more work than the staff expected, was they had something called What's the Story, which was they would put up a picture of some random background element of the movies or the holiday special or something else that that they had plenty of background characters that didn't have any information on, or very, very little. And for you type up 1,000 characters, because it was measured in characters, it wasn't a word count thing.
Of course.
And you'd do a databank entry for that thing, and whoever wrote the best one in terms of both sort of basic storytelling, use of existing continuity, just general engagement whoever did the best job won the contest, and the reward was that story became that background element's official, at the time, canon background.
Oh, that's so cool, man.
And I won twice in that. Once for Cain Addis, which is a two-headed alien seen very briefly in the background of the Jabba's palace scenes in Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
And then Slither Bushvorb, who is a Nooknog private eye. And when you're watching Obi-Wan and Dexter Jetster talking, they're in the booth behind Obi-Wan.
Oh, cool.
This Nooknog and a Doug. And it was already an established fact that he was a private eye. So for that one, I went like hard on hard-boiled and film noir stereotypes. Like,
hell yes.
Like wherever I could slip in a little bit of like Raymond Chandler style language, even though it was still a databank entry, so it kind of had to stick to a nonfiction format. I was still like using the sorts of slang that you would.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was just I'm happy with my Cain Addis one. I was particularly proud of how that one turned out. And based on the strength of those two entries, I was asked by Lucasfilm to write up an actual article for Star Wars Hyperspace.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I wrote...
What was this article about?
It was titled The Written Word, and it was about the writing systems used to write BASIC in Star Wars. So BASIC is the language that all the humans are using. If you're watching the movies in English, it's all the stuff that's in English. If you're watching like a Spanish dub, it's everything in Spanish. It's the language of humans in Star Wars.
Yeah.
But we see a whole bunch of different ways of writing things. Like the one that everyone knows is the Orabesh. It turns up over and over again. It was originally, again, a Star Wars West End Games role-playing game, or technically miniatures game supplement that introduced that one to Star Wars. And it took off and kind of went everywhere. But it's obviously not the only writing system in Star Wars. Like, we talk about X-Wings and Y-Wings, not Sesh wings and Yurt wings. We talk about...
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
We talk about R2-D2 and C-3PO, not Resh-2, Dorn-2, and Kresh-3PO, or Kresh-3Peth Osk.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So...
do they use numbers the same? I thought Orabesh
So they do
also has a
use
name for
numbers the same, I think.
Right?
Yeah, Orabesh has
Correct me if I'm wrong.
slightly stylized numerals, but they're still recognizably Arabic, and the Arabic numerals.
Because you see them in...
Boy, the Moors got everywhere, didn't they?
Yeah.
They certainly did.
But you can see them in A New Hope in the binoculars while Luke's looking across Tatooine.
Oh, yeah, the numbers are on the bottom of his...
And I believe also in the Death Star countdown.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, we could go on for a very long time about the extended canon and your impact on the extended canon. And I feel like this is a good opportunity for me to say one of my favorite catchphrases of this podcast, which is, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
So, seeing as we're already like a quarter of the way into this bad boy, I feel like we should take this time to use your font of knowledge and ask you a few questions as we transition into this new era that we're supposed to be talking about, which is the High Republic.
Oh, I don't know anything about that.
Okay, good.
Cool.
Good. You're the perfect candidate to be on this. Before we go any further, do you have anything else you want to say to tie up your story of the written word and hyperspace? Because I don't want to cut you off on that.
Eventually, hyperspace folded, and a lot of the materials that were available there have never seen the light of day since. And then, of course, the Disney buyout and the Legends announcement kind of... I won't say it soured me on Star Wars, but it was clearly the vast, rich tapestry I'd invested so much energy in was going to be sidelined, and trying to recapture the sort of minutiae-based enthusiasm I had for that tapestry just never really transferred over to the new material in the same way. So I would call myself
I get that.
kind of a fan of the new Star Wars. I've watched all the new theatrical movies. I've watched The Mandalorian. I've fallen behind on the Disney Plus series, so I haven't watched much more than that. And pretty much all of the supplemental materials, other than a few of the like guidebooks that came out related to the movies. I haven't read any of the new novels or anything like that.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Did you watch Ahsoka?
I've not yet watched Ahsoka.
Okay, so scratch this High Republic episode. We're going to tell you about why you need to watch Ahsoka. It is so good.
I
I'm
have
just kidding.
had a few spoilers about Ahsoka, and I definitely need to put that on my list of things to do at some point.
Yeah. I feel like you would love it.
Yeah,
Or,
it feels-
have you watched? Did you watch Rebels?
I did watch Rebels.
Okay, good, because it's basically season 5 of Rebels.
Yeah, it's season 5 of Rebels, right? With just live action.
Yeah. Have you gotten around to Bad Batch?
See, you're making me look like a pretty sad geek right now. I have not seen The Bad Batch either.
Hey, we're not
Hey,
here
you
to
know what?
gatekeep.
We are also sad geeks because we did watch Bad Batch, and it's so good and sad at times, and we cried, but it's also really good. So like, we also cheered and we're happy, but no, like, you're good.
It does regularly make water come out of my face. I'm not sure what that effect is. I might have an allergy. Just kidding. I cry all the time. So, so regarding this new era of Star Wars, like, one thing I do want to say, just to reassure you here, is that it has become kind of common practice for people to. I've seen it a lot online. I don't know if Ryan can say the same, but I know that at least in the algorithmic expressions of Star Wars love that I have seen in the various social medias, that many people basically consider Legends to be canon unless Disney can say this is what actually happened. So everything that doesn't have, like, if Disney says like, no, it actually happened this way, then it's like, okay, cool, that's the new canon. But there's a fleet of, is it a fleet or a battalion?
Or it's a battalion, something like
There's
that.
like
It's
a Revan squad, basically. Yeah. But there are like things named after a lot of things that happened in the Old Republic. Also, Disney's still making money on the Old Republic, so that game is still running. And there's still elements of the greater Star Wars continuity that have been brought
in the last probably more 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, it's very much become, we call it Legends because we want the freedom to change it, but we don't necessarily want to have to change it.
I don't know if that's quite it.
It's what it feels like to me. Like, it
now,
feels very
definitely,
much
because
like,
before...
Oh, initially, no.
Yeah, they're like, no, everything's all reset. Nothing that happened. And
everyone got mad.
Yeah.
So,
but it's interesting now that a lot of the writers that they're using for the books grew up on all the expanded universe books. So
wrote in the expanded universe.
Yeah, and some of them wrote. In fact, there's two novels coming out in the next 6 months. Both writers wrote a bunch in an expanded universe stuff, which is nice.
Did Claudia Gray write in the expanded universe as well?
Oh,
and John Jackson Miller did.
Yes,
Tim
he wrote.
Zahn did, and they've all written Star Wars books.
Yeah, and
the new canon.
Jason Fry's still around doing some stuff behind the scenes.
Jason Fry was just who I was going to mention. In fact, when you talk about keeping stuff, he has a term for the infrastructural expanded universe. There's not a whole lot of desire within Lucasfilm to like move planets around unless it really suits a story, or change who manufactured the TIE fighter unless it was needed. So it's still seen our fleet systems that built the TIE, because why change something like that when you've got this rich material to already use?
Definitely.
And Filoni has said as much too.
Yeah. But going back to Jason Fry, and I think you're trying to come out to the Legends Con with Florence and I.
Oh, I wish I could have.
But he gave a really good talk and kind of talked about all that, and especially with his work on all the planets and maps and just all the cool works he's done. And I think we talked about it on a previous episode, but I ended up buying his was it like an Atlas book?
The Star Wars Atlas.
And it is so freaking cool. And he's basically like, Lucasfilm really didn't change anything. They didn't want to change anything. So like, this book came out, 15 years ago, but they still use this as a basis for the most part, besides new planets. And it sounds like he has a live document with some of the authors to like update any new planets that they write in, or update previous planets to just the new canon stuff. So it's kind of nice seeing, these days at least, a little more cohesion going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because at first there wasn't anything, and the Aftermath books came out and I read them and I didn't love them, because it tried to do too much too soon, and a lot of things worked, a lot of things didn't work. But the last 5 or 6 years, they've really been sprinkling in a lot of old expanded universe stuff. So it's been really nice.
Yeah. And it's been nice too, like people like Tim Zahn who come in and they're like, hey, can you write a trilogy about Thrawn that just takes place between, episode 3 and 4?
Yeah.
And kind of sprinkles in and flushes out all of his appearances in Rebels and everything. And it basically just takes place between seasons of Rebels. Each book does. But that's still him. And he still is able to put in a lot of things that he had before without making, too much of a change, because he is still operating within the
current,
the Skywalker saga era.
Right.
So, and Filoni himself has said, like, people love the expanded universe. They love where we're going with that. They love, or where they went with that. And there's no necessary reason, unless the story really calls for it, to discount some of those things. And so his exact quote, I don't recall, but basically he was like, look, people love the expanded universe. Why not take elements from that and sprinkle that in to make, to kind of connect that to that previous material.
Right. I mean, and that's what they did with the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
They came, George and Dave came up with ideas and the writing team, but then they were heavily influenced by the expanded universe. I mean, they got, the Witches of Dathomir from Courts of Princess Leia and going way back.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and then all the stuff that happens in Dark Disciple, which is one of my favorite Star Wars books in the new canon, is very heavily influenced on the Dark Horse Clone Wars comics. And all the stuff with Quinlan Vos, though they don't really, have any Aayla Secura stuff going on in there because we're dealing with Asajj. But my point being at the beginning of this little tangent of all the different ways is that the vibe, while initially was very, look, it's just the prequels, Clone Wars, the original trilogy, and this one book called Son of Dathomir, then expanded to like, okay, we'll call it Legends because it might have happened that way, but if we want to make money, it might have happened differently. And I think that was a pretty savvy business decision on their part when they finally came around to being a little more open and obvious about that, though they've never said it out loud. This idea that, the stuff that happened thousands and thousands of years ago, maybe it happened that way, maybe it didn't, it's fine.
Yeah. We'll get to it if we get to it.
And like you said, the infrastructural side of things is relatively similar. Maybe the construction of the Death Star was a little bit different because we wanted to have a little more exploitation of the Geonosians or something. But things like that, elements in that regard, I think are, if not fully respected, at the very least honored.
Right.
Yeah.
So now moving forward again to the High Republic. Okay, so the kind of point of this episode, and one of the reasons we wanted to bring you on specifically, is because you have such an awareness of what the expanded universe was, and something that has come up in an interview with Charles Soule, who created the High Republic, or who was a major part in the High Republic's creation, I should say, has said that they chose the time they chose because it did not really interfere with any other canon era in Star Wars. And the High Republic basically takes place between 500 BBY and 100 BBY. In the old canon, what happened during those years that this new event in Star Wars could be discounting?
I must say Mr. Soule's analysis is pretty spot on. It's kind of a bit of a desert between 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin and the period immediately preceding the prequel trilogy.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to think of any story we actually see. Like, there's plenty of stories that reference events, typically like, this character was born in this time, or this planet was founded. But there's very little in terms of like, narrative
actual
stuff
story
going on in that era. Like, you've got these huge periods, like, clustered around, like, 4,000 years before A New Hope, where you've got the old Sith Wars.
Right.
And then you've got the little bit later, the Old Republic MMO has a whole bunch of stuff going on. Then there's kind of a bit of dead space. And then you've got like 2,000 to 1,000, where you've got new Sith Wars, which are stories that you see represented in, John Jackson Miller's...
Knights of the Old Republic?
I'm sorry?
The Knights of the Old Republic comic?
No, that one's in the old Sith Wars. Then he went on into
right.
Knight Errant. Knight Errant.
Yes, Knight Errant was about 1,000 years. Yeah, and actually, I just started reading those. Well, I started about a year ago, but I just found his novel finally because it's hard to find. And I'm the old school completionist where like I don't want the Legends logo on the top. I want like the OG one. Mm-hmm. So I finally found that, but that happens because I was just looking into it the other day. The Darth Bane books happen.
There's another
like 1,025 years before Battle of Yavin, while the Knight Errant books happen like 1,050 years. So it's like a 25-year gap before all the Bane stuff starts, which is pretty cool.
Right.
Those books are great.
Those stories kind of all lead up to the Battle of Rusan, which is sort of the big turning point where you wind up with only 2 Sith after that, and the Sith are pretty much in hiding the whole time until Maul raises his ugly head at Naboo. Yeah. There are certainly stories that involve them in there, and Drew Karpyshyn's novels cover a lot of them, but it's all very skullduggery and background stuff. There's not like big galaxy-shaking events going on from that 1,000-year point up to and
So we're really okay. So the High Republic is then basically untouched territory, especially if you, because I know I'm more on that like if it's Legends but they haven't discounted it in any way whatsoever, then I'm just gonna be like, yeah, that's my canon, it's fine.
Yeah.
And some people are very much, if they haven't fully canonized it, then it didn't happen, and that's that's fine. But it feels like they've kind of chosen a relatively safe era to go, we can tell new stories here without pissing anybody off. And from what I understand, when the group got together to start to write this, and we'll get more on that in just a second, they very much had to have that discussion of what time period do we want to talk about. And so for the final decision that they came up with, it was very much, let's talk about when the Republic was what it was supposed to be, when the Jedi were what they were supposed to be. How do we take, how do we tell a story and give conflict to a time when things actually worked?
Yeah.
And so you see that's why they call it the High Republic, because this is the point where the Republic is at its finest, and this is the point when the Jedi are spread out throughout the galaxy and they are at their finest. And while that's working, it's also somewhat of a Gilded Age in that there are problems on the outskirts and on the frontier. But before we get too into the weeds regarding the lore aspect of it, Brian, can I defer to you to tell how this whole thing got started?
Yeah. Okay. So, so back in 2017, 2018, Michael Siglain, who is now the director of creative franchise over at Lucasfilm. He does all the books and all that kind of stuff. And he's also written a few things as well for Star Wars. He had an idea to get a group of authors together to write just a big old story, kind of like how they did with Vector Prime and
the
New Jedi Order in the 2 series afterwards. So he got 5 authors together, and they all got together up at Skywalker Ranch, and they fleshed out the story of the High Republic, where it happens about 200 years, 150 years, 200 years before the Phantom Menace for Phase 1. They kind of wrote a story about what the Jedi would go through when they're at the top of their game, allegedly, but also like what scares the Jedi and what would give them trouble around that time. And what's cool about the High Republic is they're doing it in 3 phases, and they kind of modeled it after the movies. So Phase 1 is kind of like your original trilogy, and then there's 3 waves in there. So basically, 3 kind of movies going on. And then they go to Phase 2, which is kind of a prequel story. So they go back 150 years before that and tell a story there that influences what happens, but is it's pretty involved with what's going on, but it really sets things up and really gives an awesome background to some of the characters, some of the villains, and they finished that up, and they just now started Phase 3 about 2 months ago, and that happens a year after Phase 1 ends, and that'll be kind of your sequel trilogy era sort of stuff.
Where it does differ, though, is at the end of Phase 1, the story is very much like the end of Empire, where you're going, oh, shit, things are really bad. how do we get out of this? Bad things just happened.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Whereas Return of the Jedi ends and, we're all singing Yub Nub and getting down and Project Xing over some dead stormtroopers or whatever. I just imagine you walk like jumping onto a folding table. But the end of phase 1 very much was this moment of like, oh no, how did this happen? And it's funny because it kind of reminds me of one of the suggested watch orders of the original of the original Star Wars, where you watch Star Wars or A New Hope, if you will, then you watch Empire, and then you go back and watch Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And if you really want, you can go all the way back and watch Phantom Menace before you go, okay, now we'll go forward. So Revenge of the Sith is what reveals that Luke and Leia are siblings, and Return of the Jedi kind of closes the whole thing out.
Yeah.
And this particular story structure for the books and the rest of the media that they've put together to make this High Republic storytelling initiative has felt very much like that. When I finished phase 1, it was like, okay, now we're going to go back and see how we got here.
Yeah.
Instead of going, okay, we'll finish this story out and then we'll go back and see how it happened. Instead, it's, no, I have too many questions. And it's, okay, let's answer those questions real quick.
We know. Yeah.
It's this episode 8 of a Netflix show when suddenly it's like, oh, we got to do a backstory real quick. So we're going to do a whole flashback episode.
Yeah.
I think that's a very, like, as far as the viewing order of the films goes, I think that's probably the best way to introduce someone new to Star Wars. So it's interesting to see that they would try to do that sort of thing from the very start with the story of, let's tell you a story, let's leave you at a point where you have a lot of questions and wondering how things will get out of it. Go back and tell you all the stuff that leads up to it, and then
jump back,
capstone it with the finale.
Yeah. They're actually releasing the next book tomorrow, and
at the time of recording this,
which
is the 4th of March in 2024.
And I read the first book, and just reading that, they really do naturally and smoothly tie in stuff from both phases, and you're like, oh, this is, and it made reading it so much more exciting and fun. You're like, oh, I get that reference. Oh, that's what that meant. Oh, that totally works now. And yeah, worked out really well.
Yeah. Huh. And the viewing order, like I've read sprinklings of pages in phase 3, which I'm not supposed to be at yet because I'm technically still reading phase 2. But I get to certain points where like certain people are showing up, and the people who are showing up to now deal with how bad the problem has gotten are people who I won't know about until phase 2. So it's interesting how they've kind of like, there's certain characters that show up in phase 2 that will be important in phase 3, but were not present in phase 1.
Yes.
So it'd be like if you watched the Clone Wars, I guess, you would know who Jabba the Hutt is prior to Return of the Jedi. And I guess you now, because of the special editions, you know who he is in A New Hope. But him showing up, you're like, oh, I know that guy. He caused all those problems.
He's a bad guy.
Back in the thing. He was there already. Or like,
he's got a cute kid named Stinky.
Yeah.
He hosted the Boot to Eve pod race.
Yeah. That guy. Also that, episode 1. Duh.
Yeah. But at the same time, you also, now that you know that I am your father, really comes from a place of like, and the reason I look like this is because of a whole bunch of trauma that you now understand. It really does make the redemption of Vader and everything going on with Luke really, like, you get it.
Yeah, it's more
totally
heartfelt.
Get why Luke is what Luke sees in him. He's not just the scary robot with James Earl Jones' voice. He's a man, and he's stuck in there, and he's stuck working for this crotchety old senator who you watched manipulate the entire galaxy into power.
Classic Sheev.
And you really don't know the Emperor going into Return of the Jedi.
Right.
And when you finally get to him in Return of the Jedi, having seen those earlier things, you're like, oh, yeah, I get it. I know this guy. That's Sheev Palpatine, hero of the Republic. He got horribly scarred because of some terrible things that Mace Windu did. Gosh, the Jedi suck. In that same regard, back in the High Republic, the story of the prequels, phase 2 of the High Republic is very much this, let's build up these mysterious people who we don't truly understand their motivations yet. And I'll just let you know right now, the bad guys in the High Republic are called the Nile. as in Nihil, as in nihilism, as in we don't care about anything.
And they don't.
So you really don't know fully what their motivations are, specifically the main bad guy whose name is Marchion Ro.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, why does this guy hate the Jedi so much? And then you start phase 2, and it's like, oh, here's some characters. They happen to fly on the same ship that the bad guy did 150 years later.
Like, they're still
and one
building
of them has
it.
their last name.
Yeah.
So
There's connective tissues going on.
there's a lot of connective tissues going into building it, which really enrich everything that you just read within that first story. And the building of it is really cool.
So the villains in this one are nihilists, huh?
Yeah.
But not nihilists.
Right.
But also not
Right,
nihilists.
yeah. Very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're a group of marauders.
Say what you will about the tenets of the New Order, at least it's an ethos.
Right?
But these guys are they're marauders, they're pirates. They don't care about anything.
They're about the chaos. They want the payloads. They want the booty. They're down to party all the time.
And they want the booty.
And they want the booty at the party.
They enter by releasing this gas, and every one of them wears a mask. It hides their face. I don't want to say dehumanizes, because it also, detwillicks and
there's all sorts of
Moncals and
alien species,
and Wookiees,
Gungans and Dugs, and
freaking
so rad.
Wet Bub, an evil Gungan is it's so
such
good.
a dick.
He's such a dick.
He's so good.
But he's great, and he's got this, like, people loved Wet Bub. They're like, an evil Gungan, I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Like, to hear a Jar Jar style speech coming out of somebody who is talking about murder, it's very satisfying. But the characters, they release this cloud. Their entire thing is storm based. They have, like, they all say ride the storm. That's like their big thing. They've got these 3 lightning bolts on the sides of all their clunker ships that they've put together, which is very reminiscent of like if Mad Max car design was applied to Star Wars ships.
That's what it would be.
That's kind of what they're flying in on. And they come in, and then there's a Tempest runner who runs a Tempest, and then within the Tempest there's storms and clouds and strikes, and they're all varying levels of authority within their.
Yeah, they definitely have a pretty interesting hierarchy.
Yeah, like the infrastructure of the Nile is really, really neat, despite it being called Nile.
Yeah,
they have some pretty decent infrastructure, but that infrastructure was largely put together by the family that Marchion has come from, and Marchion Ro is this very calculating, like, he's my favorite villain in Star Wars since Thrawn.
Cool, yeah.
Because he is so very particular. There's a line in one of the later books, and it's from a Jedi, and it's about Jedi. I think it might even be in Midnight Horizon, the last book in phase 1, where they're talking about making sure every word you say is the truth.
Oh.
And it's kind of a way to slow down talking and make sure that you are saying exactly what you mean, so that you aren't just rambling and accidentally speaking out of turn. Marchion Ro definitely isn't caring about the truth, but he is caring about making sure everything he says holds weight.
Yeah.
To me, especially the way Mark Thompson reads him.
Oh, he's so good.
Mark Thompson as a narrator is just...
And you've heard,
chef's kiss.
Yeah, if you guys have listened to the podcast before, we rant and rave about him all the time. He's also a nice dude. We've met him.
He's a very nice guy.
So many times at a couple different cons.
But Mark Thompson, whenever he reads Marchion Ro, like, he reads him so well that when they eventually do an audio drama, they brought him in to play that character, as well as a couple of others, because he is the voice of Marchion Ro. And he has this very particular phrasing in every word he says, and he's like always kind of taking breaths between, making sure, and so he like makes everyone wait on him, and it very much feels like Thrawn in that regard. Circumnavigating the chain of command requires forbearance. Things like that is kind of your Thrawn thing, whereas Marchion Ro, every couple of words he's making sure he's doing it, which, while you would think it makes him sound less calculated than Thrawn, I feel like it's a combination of he's just as calculated, but you really don't know what he's thinking.
Yeah.
And that makes him scary. And that's the thing about the Nile, is there's not this major ethos regarding what they're doing.
And they're non-Force users.
And they're not, none of them
which is one of the big aspects of this is, the Jedi are fighting them, but they usually fight the Sith or, some other Darksider thing or whatever, but they're not used to fighting these like nihilistic pirates.
Yeah. And the thing is it's very much that what happens when you back a wild animal into a corner. Mm-hmm. And in the very first book, you kind of see what happens when the Nihil are finally at, like, they're obviously going to lose a battle at this time called the Battle of Kur. And you see them do heinous things.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from kamikazing to like releasing radiation to, I mean, it's just
pretty gnarly,
wild.
Yeah.
How messed up they get. And the Jedi are, in this case, they're kind of the British in the Revolutionary War a little bit. They're like, whoa, no, that's not how we fight.
Yeah.
And so the Jedi have to kind of, unlike the British, the Jedi are like, okay, well then I guess we have to start outthinking them.
Yeah.
And they're having a hell of a time doing it.
They're having, and kind of similar to the Clone Wars, they're having to figure out like, and there's a decent section in the book in different Jedi talking about like, wait, we're peacekeepers. We're not soldiers. But at the same time, if they aren't soldiers right now, if they're not protecting everybody, then what are they doing?
Yeah.
What is their role in the galaxy then? Some Jedi are like, you know what? I can't do this. I'm walking away. I'm not doing this anymore. And some of them are like, no, we have to do this. If we don't stand up and make a move now, then what good are we anyways in this galaxy?
Yeah.
So it was really kind of cool seeing what was going on.
And there's been some good conversations within the characters too, where like these two characters are discussing how stressed they are about having to be soldiers all the time. And one of them's like, yeah, I'm like constantly worried and constantly scared and constantly angry and constantly excited. And the other one, who typically runs kind of parallel and they have very similar thinking, is sitting there worrying to himself because he's like, no, I'm not feeling anything anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not even afraid anymore. I just kind of am numb to everything. And he, as Jedi who are trying very hard not to be ruled by their emotions, he's like, wait, no, I don't have any.
Yeah.
And the other one's going,
I have too many.
So it's really cool in that regard. Regarding the infrastructure and kind of the nuanced minutia of the High Republic, I feel like Brian can kind of talk about this a little bit better than I can.
Like how the books are broken down?
No, actually, I'm still kind of in lore, but if you want to talk about the books and the multimedia aspect of it too, I think we should definitely get back to that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I also would like you to run point on talking about what the Jedi are doing at this time, because this is not the Jedi on Coruscant, but it's also not the Jedi in the Old Republic.
Right. So the cool aspect about this is with the Jedi, they haven't seen big fights or battles since Darth Bane and the ending, I'm using air quotes right now, of the Sith. And so they've had 600-700 years of peace, relative peace in the galaxy. Yeah, there's little skirmishes on planets and they'll get called to help with diplomacy and that kind of stuff. Or
there is a war between two planets that's kind of going on.
And it's been going on for years.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool because they mentioned it a lot in phase 1, but when they go back to phase 2, it's one of the primary plot points of phase 2.
Yeah. Like they're no longer at war, but it's like an unsteady peace during the High Republic phase 1. Whereas phase 2, like they're at war.
Yeah, they hate each other and it's a whole thing.
And that unsteady peace has only been in like the last decade within phase 1 when they're thinking back to it. It's like, oh yeah, 10, 15 years ago when they were constantly fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's little times like that. But so the Jedi have been just kind of just general peacekeepers, but they've also been helping out with Pathfinders who are trying to find new hyperspace routes. So they're going out into the unknown regions and they're trying to get into wild space and just find new paths and new planets and possibly planets to bring into the Republic. So they're kind of focusing on that. And there's also Jedi outposts and temples that are kind of spread out throughout the Republic side of the galaxy. And I think a few places where the Republic isn't, because they're just ancient Jedi temples that are there. Right. So it's been really awesome to see them write about these Jedi temples in the galaxy at large. Whereas, in the prequel trilogy, everybody's on Coruscant. That's where the main Jedi temple is. And yeah, there's probably a few spread around here or there, but like they don't use them,
Right. Yeah, Legends had a few spin-off academies on like Almus and Camparis, but there was like, if you weren't on Coruscant, you weren't part of the mainstream Jedi thing.
And so this one's, I want to say like, I don't know, 60% of the Jedi things are on Coruscant, and that's where the main Jedi temple is.
Yeah, that's where the council.
That's where the High Council is. But they're also spread around the galaxy, which is really cool. And each outpost kind of handles things a little bit different. And because everything's been at peace, the Jedi are a little more relaxed in kind of their general philosophy of how they are themselves.
They're banging.
Some of them are, yeah.
Oh my!
There's definitely some you guys definitely fooled around as Padawans issues, and some of them as adults are like, nah, we don't do that anymore because
we're adults
and we're adults. Yeah. And then there's others that are like, yeah, but I still like you a lot.
Yeah. So yeah,
our man.
Yeah. So, we see just the relationships seem more, I don't know, human?
Yeah.
And not as, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for?
Mythic?
No, they're definitely mythic, which is cool.
Not as like uppity, noble, and celibate.
Yeah. No, that's a good word.
Like, there's definitely Jedi that are going around and just like, hey, no attachment, babe. Sorry.
There's a few, yeah. Yeah, so we see it in their relationships, but also with their lightsabers. They're very ornate. They're kind of extra, like
there's gold trim on these things. There's cross guards.
Yeah, they look fancy as hell, and they're very shiny, and
their robes are that way too. They have white robe. They have a lot of ornamentation and design in it, and
so much variety everywhere.
And everyone is allowed a lot more individuality.
Yeah,
you would see than we do see in some of the more subdued monk-esque.
Yeah.
Levels of what the order is on Coruscant. And I think that also largely has to do with how spread out they are. Mm-hmm. Because they're so spread out, their ideas of what being a Jedi is
can vary a little
more because they're not quite in this bubble.
Right.
This echo chamber that is the Coruscant Jedi temple.
Yeah. Well, and also, depending on the temple you're at, some temples have their own little Jedi insignia. So, still in Geos, they're on the Hynestian Jedi Temple area. Yes.
Is that where he trained Vern?
Yeah. So him and his previous Padawan, Vernestra Rwoh, who we'll get into in a minute, Vernestra has a different design on her Jedi robes because it shows kind of what temple she was at. So kind of like, Goku and Master Roshi.
Yeah.
Or Goku and King Kai.
Yeah, like
when he changes his uniform.
Yeah. Or the Kai, method, or Whis.
Yeah, which I thought was a really cool design choice and stuff because...
everyone's wearing the same gi.
Yeah, or slightly different colors,
Something else that's really cool about the High Republic that I think also might sell you a little bit is that the Force is felt differently by all of these Jedi. And there's a lot of question of how do they experience the Force. So some experience it as a song or as light or as warmth or
waves and water.
Waves of water or this sort of sound. And there's some characters who, I'll be honest, feel like they're being written as ADHD, who have to basically close themselves off from the Force because they feel it and they experience it way too much that they have to kind of train themselves to not feel that.
Yeah.
Imri Kantaros and
Barriaga.
And Barriaga, and because he's too empathic.
Yeah.
But Imri Kantaros is too... he's just too like hyper aware of everyone's... I mean, he's also empathic, but like not in a I care because you care kind of way, but in a, oh my God, please stop being stressed because you're stressing me out.
Let me unstress you because I can affect your feelings like that.
And he has a tendency to do a little bit of emotional mind trick out of habit because it's the only way he can cope with it because he's not very good at shutting it off. But then like Avar Kriss very clearly has battle meditation.
Yes.
But as she experiences things as this song of the Force, she can tell when someone's part in the harmony has faded away or it has become dissonant. And so she's got this sort of synesthesia
it's really
music
cool
regarding how she experiences the Force. And that conversation has led to a lot of conversations with the authors of like, if you were a Jedi, how do you think you would experience the Force?
Yeah, which is very new.
Are you more of a song person? Are you more of a this person? It's really neat. I don't know if that the old legends really talked very much about that. John, can you speak to that?
There's a certain amount of lack of that in old legends. I think the place you see it best is in Abel Pena's Skywalkers, which is a very late addition to Legends that kind of came out after the announcement, as a result of he was able to get it tied in with an article on the Clone Wars just to finally get it out because he'd been working on it for years.
Oh.
And there's a great passage in it where Halagad Ventor, who is on the planet Sky with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, Halagad is levitating Anakin to show off the Skywalker to the natives of Sky. It's
That's rad.
Come on, Skywalker, Skywalk.
Right. But in the middle of it, that he uses that opportunity to really explore what Halagad is feeling as he opens himself up to the Force to make this happen. And it's a really great passage about just experiencing all of the many things in the Force. And it's, at this point, it's been a bit long enough since I've read it that I can't like quote direct parts of it, but I think it's the only time in the recent EU where they really show what it's like to have the power to touch everything and everywhere and feel the flow of life around you and direct it in a way.
Cool.
And so that's probably the most outstanding passage in Legends I can think of about what it's like to be a Force user using the Force. And so I recommend Skywalkers to everyone if you can find it. It's only in PDF.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Unless you're fortunate enough that someone made a handful of copies for giving out, because obviously there's no legal way to actually make it for profit. So I have a copy that someone made and gave to me of it that's
awesome.
Allows me to flip through it by hand and read, and also let me get Abel's autograph on it.
Oh, nice. Sweet.
But it's a very... Coming back to the Force thing, there's other places in there where there's talk about what it's like to feel the Force, but that passage when he's lifting Anakin is just chef's kiss.
Hell yeah.
Force first person experience.
Yeah.
The moment in The Light of the Jedi when the battle meditation is like at its peak and she's feeling all of the Jedi in the area.
Yeah.
And all of the Jedi are lending themselves to solving this problem. That, to me, felt the same way you're describing this, in that you're like, oh my God, like, I think I kind of get it.
Yeah.
You know, because so much of it is just like, oh, you feel it, you know, let your hate flow through you, you know, and all that. Or like, you know, it surrounds us and binds us, you know, all that stuff. But like, that's all very fluffy talk. This is, what are you experiencing here? Like, is there just this white noise hiss that's running over you at all times? And does it sound better when you're in Zen?
Yeah.
Or do you feel a little bit lighter on your feet when you are more at peace with your surroundings? That kind of conversation, I feel like, is something that both the EU and the current canon have kind of been lacking. And I think it's really neat that Charles Soule took the opportunity to have that conversation and bring that into it, because the story group, which is those 5 writers that Brian brought up, each of them gets their own book or their own comic series, etc. And when they do, they all get an opportunity to play with that. Some play with it more than others, but because they're all using the same toys that have to go back into the box together, they all have to know kind of the rules of how each person's action figure is going to work and how the game is supposed to be played.
You're right.
Regarding the multimedia aspect of it and regarding how these stories are told, Brian, can we jump back to that real quick before we move on to the latter half of this conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So in this whole thing, I don't know if you're aware, John, but there's 3 kinds of books. There's comic books and there's manga that are all kind of spread out to tell this whole story. And the way they set it up is you have your adult novel, you have your young reader novel, which is kind of, I don't know, I guess middle schoolish.
Yeah. Right.
And then you have your young reader novel, which I guess is more elder elementary school. And the writing styles are very similar. They're not necessarily written for kids or for adults or for teenagers. There's very dark storylines that happen in kind of everything, but the major difference is the age of the main characters, the average age of the main characters. Some of them are the adults, which are based around the adult novels. Some of them are the Padawans, so they're in their teenage years, sometimes later, sometimes mid, but they're around that age group. And then you have your young reader novels, which are kind of focused on the younglings and the early Padawans. So
yeah, people who've just become Padawans, or there'll be a Padawan, and then the people that they're with, like Avon Staros, are basically 4th and 5th graders who they're not necessarily Jedi, but they are major elements of the story, and so they're there too.
Right. Yeah. So there's 3 waves in the first phase. Yeah.
Yep.
3 waves in the first phase. And what they did is
a test at the end of this. We expect you to take it and everybody at home to take it.
Right. Pay attention. So basically they put out one of each novel in each wave, along with like 5 to 6 comics each. And then those all lead up into the second wave, which a big old thing happens with that big novel. And then it's kind of the fallout with the next couple of books, including the comics and then even the manga to an extent. And then it wraps up in wave 3, and it's kind of everything kind of leads to these books, and then a huge thing that happens, not to do too many spoilers, but it affects everybody and everything, and the Jedi at large, and the galaxy at large as well, with what they got going on. And the Nihil like causes all sorts of havoc, and they have all sorts of weapons, and it's kind of an interesting way they were doing it. And then we jump into phase 2, and there's 2 waves, but they're kind of spread out a little bit longer. And then phase 3 also has 3 waves, but those are also spread out. So I think with phase 1, from the day that the first book dropped to the last book was probably about a year and 2 or 3 months, maybe.
Yeah. And in story, it's about a year.
It's about, year and a half, 2 years.
Roughly the same time, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit longer, about 2 years.
Is it?
Just at like a year and a half, 2 years.
You can see it in the comics, some of the characters clearly age up.
Yeah, which is kind of cool.
Made it through their adolescence. Some characters that start as, Padawans still learning are getting knighted by the end of phase 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas phase 2, it's probably all, again, it all came out in about a year span in real life. And it was about a year or so storyline wise as well. And phase 3, it looks like it's going to be even bigger. I think we're still getting 3 books in each wave, but there's more. I believe there's going to be more comics, and everything's spread out a lot more. So there's longer periods of time in between each book that is being released.
Yeah.
And that's kind of spreading things out, which has been really nice.
Yeah, there's kind of a flagship book for each wave, but each phase also has a name.
Yes.
So the first one is phase 1 was the Light of the Jedi, and phase 2 is the
Quest of the Jedi.
And that's much more surrounding, this time when we're trying to expand the Republic and not just be a bunch of core worlds dictating how things go.
Yeah.
And that's when the frontier is, the frontier. A lot of these outer planets like Naboo, etc., they're not really even seen by the Republic. So when they have problems, the Republic doesn't come and help them, which is why the Nihil have been able to survive as well as they have and thrive as well as they have, because they can terrorize all these outer rim planets without really having any major impact on what's going on, or with the core. And by never going to the core goes, yeah, that's the frontier's problem.
Yeah, we don't got to worry about it. So what if
there's cowboys in the Wild West that are out robbing saloons? What do we care? We got, I don't know, agriculture to have, whatever. And then the third phase is the Trials of the Jedi, which, right, that's what it's called.
Trials of the Jedi.
The Trials of the Jedi, which is very much we've never faced this before. Bad things we haven't faced this in a long time. Bad things are happening. What do? And what do indeed. But the first wave has hyperspace basically breaking, and they're like, something's wrong with hyperspace. We don't understand what's happening. Ships are being able to be pulled out of it in places where there's no gravity wells or other reasons why you might get pulled out of hyperspace on accident. There's all of this, there's massive terrorist attacks that are destroying not destroying whole planets. Obviously, we're not blowing up planets again.
Yeah, but just cities and towns,
really nice, but like having major impacts on like capital cities,
right,
and things like that.
But also trade routes and that kind of stuff. Yep. But and a lot of this starts off with what they call the Great Disaster, where something happened in hyperspace. They don't know what, but now there's all these debris and things flying out of hyperspace at almost light speed. Things are slowing down, but those are causing all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, now you have basically meteor showers that are potentially going to impact planets You know, we've got
space stations, shipyards, moons.
Yeah, everybody's going through Armageddon. Aerosmith is playing everywhere. Yeah. It's a huge problem. They're all very tired of it, and they just don't think Ben Affleck can do it.
Yeah.
So
I feel that deep down in my soul.
Yeah.
But then in the latter half of phase 1, not to give too many spoilers away, but there's something not just wrong. You know, we have our little what's wrong with hyperspace in the beginning. At the end, the Jedi go, something is happening to the Force.
Yeah.
And there's some sort of unknown enemy. They literally call it the Nameless. And they don't know what these things are and how they're able to do it. But it is crippling Jedi, Force users, Force sensitive people. And in fact, early on, not to give too many spoilers away, but like when the bad guys first are testing this weapon, they get someone in their ranks who is clearly Force sensitive and put them through it and watch them just lose their minds.
Yeah.
Because if for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just attacking midichlorians specifically, I'm not sure how it all works, but it's a major issue that they have to tackle, which means that they're now having questions about all these people who've had these great conversations about how we feel the Force in all of these beautiful ways are going, okay, so now the Force is gone.
Yeah.
And I'm scared and I don't understand why. And it's only happening sometimes and it's only happening in some places, but it very much turns the books where those things show up into like a horror book.
Yeah.
There's one that's kind of the Poseidon Adventure. But if the Poseidon Adventure had elements of Alien and elements of, I don't know, something that makes them all, something that affects their brains and
almost
makes
like
them crazy.
Cthulhu sort of thing.
It's very
Lovecraftian.
Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when they finally show them, they even have like tentacles on their face.
Oh yeah, and so I was just gonna say it's
very
really
cosmic
cool
horror.
because it's going across, you know, novels and also comics. You can see visually, and it's really cool. Each artist draws it differently because each Jedi sees it differently as well, and how it affects them and how they see the Force. So it's been really cool seeing how each, when it happens, how it's just visually different, and how like each time it's also freaky every time.
And it's really interesting too, because in the spirit of cosmic horror, I'm really glad that you said Cthulhu, because that really kind of turned the gears in my head. In cosmic horror, the fear is this unknown thing you can't understand. Non-Force users are like, they're seeing these things and they're like, whoa, that's fucking creepy. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Jedi are like, I've never been without the Force. I don't understand what's happening. How do I do this? And so it's unknown.
Yeah. Also,
them.
what is that big ass monster that's going on over there? And like everybody else is like, what big ass monster? What are you talking
or it's
about?
like, why is that child that, you know, I have trauma about losing, like standing there? Why am I being reminded of every failure I have had or every time that I have not been properly connected, etc.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's really, really cool. Yeah. And then the second wave, the Quest of the Jedi, deals very heavily in the Battle of Jeddah, which, if you enjoyed Rogue One, which I hope you did.
I did.
The Battle of Jeddah is something that's kind of been very mysterious. How did all these gigantic Lord of the Rings statues fall to the ground?
Yeah. Well, we get to see that.
And on Jeddah, they talk about all of the different churches of the, well, I don't want to say churches of the
They're
Force,
like sects.
Followers of the Force.
Yeah.
You know, you have the Church of the Force, the Guardians of the Wills, the Jedi, and there's like two others.
A couple like dark side, but not quite. They're not Sith, but they're dark side, but they're not quite against the Jedi. They're just doing their own thing, but like with the dark side of the Force.
Yeah, what some people in the video games might have called Grey Jedi. There was this convocation of these Force users who kind of all work together to make sure that the Force is in balance. And in fact, the main villain of that area, or of the second phase, was like is essentially a Force cult. And that Force cult was started by an excommunicated member of the Guardians of the Wills. Excommunicated might be a loose term. But he was a Guardian of the Wills who started this other group.
Yeah.
This is a podcast, and I just put my hands up to demonstrate my open hands, because the group is called the Path of the Open Hand, because they want the Force to be free. They don't want the Force to be manipulated
used.
because they feel like everything's in balance. If you save someone here, you're killing someone elsewhere.
Yeah. It's an interesting point of view.
Yeah. So yeah, those sorts of ideas, and I know those are at least canon, you know, or were in the old canon. these ideas of
the White Current crew are in there, which is really awesome. They brought those guys back. Yeah. But yeah, it's a lot to throw at you right now. So, but that's what's really awesome.
I'm picking up some of it, like the cosmic balance. Gariel Captison's religion in the Truce of Baccarat had some of those elements of balance and using having too much power here takes it away from elsewhere. So I see some of that there, and then hearing about the White Current and are they is it actually the Falanasi, or they just use the White Current with some nice?
Nope, it's Falanasi.
So bringing them back, that's interesting too.
I was very excited about that.
And then like the removal of the Force. I know that you and I have talked about that regarding Phase 1. This idea that you can take the Force from somebody, at least temporarily. You had mentioned to me at some point that idea, while not necessarily, there's like Force canceling, because I know that Thrawn had some, like, I don't know, fancy EVs or something that did that thing.
That made like bubbles of
non-force, right?
But also, like in the Tales of the Jedi, Nomi's Sunrider like strips the ability of Ulic Qel-Droma, who is a Jedi who has become one of the Dark Lords of the Sith, and in a moment she basically strips his ability to use the Force away, and he's no longer either a Jedi or a Sith until he gets a redemption in a later comic story.
What did you do to me? I took away your bending.
Yeah.
So
and they did something like that in the Knights of the Old Republic games as well. Talked about that.
That doesn't surprise me.
Cool. These are all the same writers for the most. Well, not all the same, but a few of the writers of the old Knights of the Old Republic comic books wrote on the game.
Right.
And there is something else. The hyperspace thing. One of the things that makes the Nihil so scary is that the Nihil have access to something called the paths. And through possibly a Force user, through some mystery knowledge, they have the ability to basically do what they did in the sequel trilogy, which was that light speed skipping. Where they basically are able to pop out of hyperspace, like within a planet's atmosphere, or
right on top of another ship,
or right into another ship.
Right into ship, yeah.
And so they're doing things that like don't quite follow the rules, and they talk about it too. There's a scientist in the first phase that talks about how many believe that the eventual leap to hyperspace travel was originally the rumor is that it was done by the Jedi, and that they didn't even need ships, things like that to move through these spaces between the galaxies. So there's around the galaxy, and this ability to move throughout it kind of plays with what exactly is hyperspace. Are they just moving this fast, or are they going through these like dimensional slipstreams? How does that all work? And that is another one of those like deep, I don't want to call it infrastructure, but kind of infrastructural lore that I don't know if that betrays what the old canon had. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I think there was definitely some elements of using the Force. The Rakata are the original.
Yes.
Like
the what?
The Rakata are the.
I love ricotta.
Yeah.
And so
it's really good in lasagna.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Ricotta. No, this is the Rakata.
Yeah. Which they've actually been mentioned in a couple of the books.
Oh, have they?
Recently. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, like, they've been really starting to bring in some expanded universe stuff. They won't go into a whole lot of detail, but they're mentioned.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
In the lore of legends, the Rakata were, before the Republic, these conquering Darksiders who sort of introduce hyperspace technology, but it's tied to their use of the Force.
Interesting.
And it's only later that humans and Duros and other early members of the Republic are able to sort of retroactively create solely technological versions of hyperspace devices. And that lore may have been played with a little bit in the Dawn of the Jedi comics. I haven't read those, unfortunately.
Okay. A little bit. I actually just got done with my second reading.
Well, there you go. So you might be able to talk a little bit about whether there's any hyperspace stuff there. That's one area that...
There is and there isn't. So in those books, they're in a star system, and they haven't really managed to go out and about to other star systems because their space travel isn't that advanced yet. But they have the Tho Yor, which went to all the other planets in the galaxy and gathered Force users to bring him to the main Jedi planet to train. And it's interesting because those books were written just before the time of the buyout, and I really think they were trying to do a really big series, kind of like this High Republic or even New Jedi Order stuff. And because of the buyout, they couldn't expand the story a whole lot. But they used it a little bit, but it was more technological.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as far as like what it is, it does seem to be a different dimension. There's a few works that dispute that somewhat, but because there's been authors that have disagreed with other authors' take on things in the course of the expanded universe. So you get a bit of back and forth on a few things like hyperspace. But by and large, it's seen as a separate dimension where the limitations of real space don't apply and superlight travel is a default rather than an impossibility.
Yeah. So speaking of, the Force in hyperspace, there's a character that actually gets Force visions while in hyperspace. We mentioned her before, Vernestra Rowe. She's kind of one of the main characters. She's not super, I'd say she's more of a B-list main character. She's around quite a bit, but the books so far haven't really focused a lot on her, but now the books are starting to go
kind of a Boba Fett in the original trilogy kind of feel.
Sort of, maybe just like she's definitely she's one of the main characters in a couple of the young reader books with a bunch of other characters, but she's being built up she's being built up anyways, but her character was actually announced to be on the Acolyte show that's coming out, hopefully sometime this year.
Okay.
And so the Acolyte actually happens at the tail end of the High Republic. It's supposed to be 100 years before the Phantom Menace. So I went to a celebration in London this year and went to the panels, which are great. But they mentioned that they really use the High Republic's art styles and just basic definitions and aesthetic to really enforce and trying to give more life to what's going on at the Jedi and Republic at this time, 100 years before Phantom Menace. So it's been really cool hearing that, but also seeing and reading about like all these books, or reading these books and kind of lead into that era. Yeah, like I said, hopefully that should be out in summertime, fall. Yeah. I don't know. We don't even know.
Yeah, she's a Mary Allen. She's actually really cool, but they've established that Mary Allens live longer than humans do. Yeah. So we don't know how old she'll be or how old she'll be presented as, I guess. But there's a lot of characters from the prequels also that have some carryover. Yariel Poof, Opal Rensisis, Yoda and Yaddle.
Yeah. We love us some Yaddle.
Tara Sinube. He's alive during that time, though we haven't really seen much of him in the High Republic. We have seen Opal Rensisis and Yariel Poof pretty extensively. Yoda was gone quite a lot in Phase 1, but Yaddle has shown up and dropped some wisdom, dropped some knowledge, little nuggets here and there.
Yeah.
And
Yaddle shows up a little more in Phase 2, and so does Tara Sinube. He's in Phase 2.
That's cool. That's super cool. I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
But there's some fun little tie-ins there, and I'm hoping we might be able to see some of them in the Acolyte also.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to at least, I mean, if we don't get Yoda in the Acolyte.
Oh my god, if we get Yaddle in the Acolyte, holy shit.
I would love to see more Yaddle.
Yeah, especially with Bryce Dallas Howard voicing her.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
But it's kind of cool that there's actually a few more tie-ins that they've done with the High Republic, and a lot of the authors are writing other Star Wars material. So like Charles Soule's writing the mainline Star Wars comic, so he's sprinkled in some stuff with the Path engines and the Nihil and their base called No Space.
He introduced the Amaxine station in one of his books long before the High Republic even started.
Right? Yeah. So a lot of the authors have sprinkled stuff in beforehand, and then just kind of filled in the backstory as these books have gone on.
Yeah,
which has been really kind of cool for continuity wise. And
something also to keep in mind is we talked a lot about the novels. We've talked fairly much, a little. Conversations happen about comics, and the comics are pretty much divided into the main storyline, an occasional like mini series storyline, and then the High Republic Adventures, which is a children's storyline, but most of those characters have overlap with the young adult novels. But because even though they're all intertwined, only a handful of them really feel like they should be essential readings.
Yeah.
But I would say that most of the middle grade / young adult novels and the adult novels, you could just stick to those and
get a solid story out of it.
Very solid, very
well-rounded
story.
Yeah.
And any characters that have been brought in, there's enough exposition to remind you of
who they are, where they came from.
And then there's other modes of storytelling that they brought in too. There's audio dramas, which have been incredible, and then which I mentioned earlier because with Mark Thompson showing up as Mark Young in that. And then there's also short stories that were appearing in Star Wars Insider.
Yeah,
which
they've been great.
Really, really fun and really just nice little nuggets to kind of put the whole story together. And in that same sort of what on earth was that, Doug doing behind Obi-Wan Kenobi in Dexter Jettster's Diner. And for the record, Dexter Jettster also shows up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's in the books too, which has been cool.
Yeah, so, you get a little backstory on Dexter Jettster and that kind of thing. But, Brian, did you have anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I really enjoyed was the game Jedi Survivor. There's a big High Republic storyline happening in there, and it was such a good story. I don't want to get too much into it because Bryce just started the game, but it's been one of my favorite storylines so far, and it happens outside the High Republic, but revolves around things that happened inside the High Republic. So
interesting.
Yeah, some cool flashbacks, and we get a voiceover for, I believe it's Abarensis.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I've only ever heard him through Mark Thompson.
Yeah. So there's some really cool tie-ins, and Lucasfilm's really, really trying to tie it into just everything, which has been really, really awesome to see, especially, again, continuity-wise.
Yeah, no, it's nice to see that they've been able to have such a multifaceted thing where everything's working together. Because I feel like with the more contemporary Star Wars era in the new canon, there's a lot of everything taking a backseat to the movies and TV.
Which I get bored with. I don't know about you guys.
In Mandalorian, when they start dealing with setting up for the sequels, or they start going like, hey, we're gonna basically use this as a way to explain some things that should have been explained somehow. When they start doing that sort of thing, I'm like, hey, can you just dedicate a series to that? Do we have to really ride the coattails of the Mandalorian to make this work?
Weirdly enough, I love that.
For me,
I'm here for it.
I'm here when they do a little bit of a sprinkling, that's a freaking Snoke clone floating in the tube.
Yeah.
When that sort of thing happens,
that was so crazy on set.
Yeah, okay, cool. But when it's in the background, I don't mind. But when it starts to really dominate the story, I get really frustrated with it.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, Luke in Battlefront and Luke in Legends of Luke Skywalker is I'm going to explore all facets of the Force and how it's followed.
True.
And Luke in Boba Fett.
Good point.
I'm like, you're writing Luke so that his actions in The Last Jedi make sense.
Yeah.
And you're not writing Luke how I honestly feel he would write him.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And when that sort of thing happens, when the movies are starting to dominate how they, the rules of how they can tell their story, that's when I start getting frustrated.
Fair. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was the biggest one.
John, how do you feel?
No, I'm kind of there with you. I think I don't want them devoting a series to explaining why things that should have been explained in the movies don't work. So I kind of agree with Brian that if you're going to put that information somewhere other than the movies it should have been in the first place, you might as well do it in a show that people are already watching on its own merits. But I definitely agree with you that, it's definitely better when the story that is being told is one that's natural to the writers and when and where they're setting their things, rather than having to...
Yeah.
You don't have to shoehorn everything in to make the galaxy feel right. You should shoehorn in just enough that it feels like Star Wars and it feels like there's connective tissue to other things without letting the rest of the outside story overwhelm the story you're trying to tell now.
Yeah. And speaking to that, I feel like they're doing that amazingly on Bad Batch.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Bad Batch has been a really good way to kind of connect a lot of that. And they're doing a really excellent job of naturally explaining how the somehow.
Yes. Yeah.
But in regards to what you just said, especially regarding how this doesn't really connect to the Skywalker saga, I think that's what I really like about the High Republic much. Is I want Jedi, and I want non-Jedi dealing with Jedi, and I want discussions of the Force, and I want a broader-minded Jedi, but I don't necessarily need to worry about the Chosen One.
Yeah, no.
And, don't get me wrong, Dooku Jedi Lost as a story,
it's amazing,
is right in there, and it has really nothing to do with the Skywalkers, but it's during that era of the sky. It happens in the life of Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker's timeline, but it is...
But it's mostly about Dooku growing up as a kid.
Yeah.
And training it to be a Jedi.
Yeah, but it's like an accessory to it, but it's still tied to those things.
Yeah.
And tied to them, like, not just in, themes, but also in actual events, because there's so much discussion of, like, Sifo-Dyas and how all that happened.
Yeah.
This being so far removed that you really... It's a hard sell to explain anything about how these are going, because even if something happens to Yoda that might inform a decision that took place during the Skywalker saga... Mm-hmm. There's still 100 years for other things to happen for Yoda to be like, yeah, but also, that one time when Barry got drunk or whatever, Barry the Jedi, not to be confused with Burry, who was great.
Oh, Barry.
Classic Barry.
Classic Barry. Just hitting the spotchka a little too hard. Okay, well, I think that is an excellent time to wrap up. So I just have one question, John. Did we sell you?
I will look into it a little bit. We'll see if I can fit this into my schedule, maybe, just to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Nothing else to be ready for the Acolyte.
Just make a little more bandwidth, man. Just make a little more.
Yeah. It's not like you don't have a million other things going on.
Such is the nature of life these days.
This story, the whole High Republic storyline, it's a nice breath of fresh air with everything else that's been going on, but also, again, like kind of like with you, when they got rid of the Legends, I was kind of bummed, but they've really brought this into their own, but also sprinkled in enough of what really made Legends work, storyline, and even just with how they handle everything. And it's kind of nice, like, oh, okay, this is what I grew up reading and getting into. This is what I kind of got. This is what really got me into Star Wars originally, was this kind of stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it's I've been really liking it a lot.
Something you said to me when we were very young, back in the day, John, was that you said you liked the Star Wars expanded universe because they all seemed to understand what they were doing, and they generally worked together in a way that Star Trek books and Doctor Who books, things like that, didn't always do. There was a lot of conflicting information, and the expanded universe seemed to kind of fit together pretty nicely. Mm-hmm. I feel like this particular era has done a really good job of continuing that, but also respecting the existing, old Republic and prior stories without necessarily stepping on them or completely retconning every chance they get. There's a lot of things where it's like, oh, they brought that up. That doesn't necessarily make the story I know about that canon, but it certainly legitimizes its possibility. Mm-hmm. And that feels nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess the question is not, did we sell you on this to the point where you want to read it, but rather, do you have a little more hope for what's going on in the story of Star Wars, knowing all of this now?
I think maybe I do. I don't want to make me sound like a jaded Legends only guy, but it's I found myself at a point in my life where Lucasfilm was giving up on Legends at the same time that I was ready to try and move on to later adulthood. And so
I get that.
I don't want to sell this idea that, well, I'm just grumpy about Legends and I don't want anything to do. It was just it was a natural breaking point in my own life, as well as a breaking point for Disney and Lucasfilm. And so I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with the new canon.
You just got other stuff going on.
I do think there's a few things wrong with the new canon, and I can speak to that on another show perhaps sometime.
That's a whole other podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. Yeah, because same.
But yeah, I do like hearing how the new canon's been around now for 10 years. Boy.
Yeah.
So they finally have enough time, enough back catalog to do deep cuts in their own new canon. Like those first few years where the prequels were just coming out, there wasn't enough old to draw from to make you feel like they were really pulling old tapestry threads and weaving them into something new. And it feels like there's a bit more room for that now, and now they're building this backstory that you can tie into in a game like Jedi Survivor, or it can pull elements from older things to explain or to, weave into this new tapestry. And so I'm glad that we're at a place now where a new tapestry can be woven from threads that are
older threads,
old now in some strange way that I haven't fully grasped because the new canon now has things that are old in it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
I resonate with what you're saying about this, like that was kind of a turning point, because around that time I was, veering away from things like I was kind of avoiding things like Clone Wars, where they got just a little bit too silly, because I wanted kind of more serious Star Wars, and I was afraid of what a company like Disney that only does G-rated things might do with something that involves, child murder. And, that change in my life was also happening around that same time. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was moving out, coming to LA, trying to act and figure out who I was post-college. And it falling away it just felt kind of like a natural time. And then I got closer to Brian, and now I have a room full of Star Wars posters in my very adult home house.
I also did something similar when I stopped reading the books after the new Jedi Order came out, and then I kind of kept up with some of the comics, but after that's when I got into Marvel, and that's when I started interning at Marvel Studios. And so, in fact, the buyout happened. We were doing some event for Iron Man 3, and a couple of us all got our phones started going off, and we all looked, and they're like, Disney bought Lucasfilm for how much? And then we were all just kind of looking at each other like,
and we make how much?
Yeah. But yeah, so it was kind of interesting at the time. And then, because I was kind of out of Star Wars for a couple years at that point. And then one of the guys I was working with was like, have you watched Clone Wars? I was like, no, I watched the first season. It was all right. He's like, no. You got to go back. You got to finish it. And that's kind of what got me back into it. And then, had to catch up on some of the books. And then the new canon came out. So I was like, well, hey, that's a good time to start back up, I guess. And
Makes sense.
It's been nice to come back to it, and it's been nice to come back to new things for me. I really appreciate that there's like new things coming out, even though they are discounting some of the other things occasionally. But it seems like by putting themselves into an era that is relatively untouched, they can kind of go, hey, let's expand this without bothering too many people. Yeah. And let's do this in kind of a safe space. And I appreciate that a lot. And I know that as a podcaster, as somebody who has to be on the up and up with what's going on in the geek world, I've kind of made it my job to deep dive all of the things that I could possibly like as a geek. I don't know that I necessarily would be in this same level of awareness of every single franchise if I wasn't doing this. And I know that, for some people it's like, yeah, Star Wars was nice and I had a good time with it. We had a good run, and I'm going to love what I loved. And, we'll always have Paris, well, we'll always have Theed. It seems like a romantic city.
Yeah.
But John, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, man, it's been great having you on. Finally.
I'd love to have you on in an era that you actually know tons about, so that we can all just sit here and listen to you like we're all gathered around a fire hearing Papa tell us stories
about Godzilla.
Well, we'll see maybe about having that Godzilla show you were thinking about doing happen.
Oh, it's happening, sir.
Yeah, you're not getting out of that one.
Like, Bryce has been talking about getting you on for a Kaiju Godzilla episode for years.
You finally made me break my cherry here, so we can we'll see about maybe doing another one.
This is the adult podcast.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, man.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you thinking my contributions to something that I haven't even explored are worthwhile. So
yeah, you did some good work.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. And honestly, like, the greater Star Wars universe before the Disney buyout, and thanks to all of these hints at the other one, it is better because of the work that you did.
Yeah.
Understanding the codification and the actual writing of how all this worked together. You had a big hand in that. And I think that is a big, I know that that's a big resource that these guys are using too.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff is still on Wookiepedia. There's a canon and a legend section. So we can still read all that stuff. And I got 7 tabs open right now on my laptop. And some of them are like in the legends section. Cause I'm like, oh, let me go down this wormhole.
Yeah. Well, if you look up user J Sarek, you can see some of the bigger articles I
noted
wrote up there.
That's JSAREK. for those of you listening at home.
Right, we're still podcasting, aren't we?
Yeah.
I'll stop petting the kitty then, so he makes background noise.
Oh, it's fine. We're at the point in the podcast when petting kitties is fully allowed.
Oh, good. But it's been great. Thank you for having me, hearing what little I have to say on this topic.
Well, we hope that everybody listening enjoyed the conversation and enjoyed hearing, your inputs on some of the old canon stuff and how it all ties together. And
yeah.
Well, I hope so too.
With that, if you are listening at home and you do want more of this content and you want even deeper dives of this actual subject
we had a really good idea.
We had a great idea, and it only cost us a little bit more money. Brian and I, are doing a full deep dive into the High Republic in a brand new podcast.
Yeah.
It's not Sneaky Geek. It is a Sneaky Geek affiliated podcast for sure, but it is an all ages podcast where we discuss the High Republic. And it is called the Starlight Archive. And it's going to be available anywhere you listen to your podcasts. All you got to do is go from this podcast into the little search bar on whatever you listen to podcasts on, type in the Starlight Archive, and it will be right there. You can subscribe to it, and you can get all of our information.
Which you should subscribe to it.
Yes, and you should also subscribe to us.
You
please.
should.
Yes, please. You should subscribe to that. And while we're there, we're going to be talking about characters from the little guy who puts together some droids and links them all together so that he can make some
supercomputer.
To the Jedi who is the hero of Hetzal.
Right.
We're going to talk about how they all interweave and how they all interact.
There's a small Jedi you might have heard of named Yoda. He's in and around. We'll talk about him.
There's an even more important Jedi by the name of Yaddle who might be around there. We all love ourselves some Yaddle, and if you don't, you get on board. We're on this train.
Yeah.
We're going to be releasing episodes pretty much as soon as we drop this episode, so you can go listen to that next if you want it. And we honestly are so excited about it.
Yeah.
We're going to have interviews. We're going to do deep dive, spoiler-free and spoiler...
heavy episodes. Very spoiler heavy. We're doing we're doing all sorts of deep dive, with spoilers, without spoilers. There's some really good encyclopedia books that we're going to talk about. There's a great art of book that Lucasfilm put together because they went all in on this project. So we're going to talk about all those, which you can see in those. There's an awesome timelines book that'll include a bunch of the High Republic stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and we will talk about it.
Yes. The general rhythm of the Sneaky Geek episodes is very much like, let's talk lore, let's talk fans, let's talk the industry. Every episode is getting a specific topic. So if we're talking about industry that day, we're going to be talking about industry that day. If we're going to be talking about how the books are working, we're going to be talking about how the books are working. Reviews, spoilers, full synopsis. So if you don't want to read any of this, but you want to be prepared for the Acolyte, you can just go listen to all of our spoiler episodes, get the full story from my mouth to your ears, from Brian's mouth to your
all ages podcast.
All ages podcast. That one's all ages. Sorry, from Brian's mouth to your ears. We're going to be whispering in your ear a lot. No, we're not. It's actually it's very, very normal and fine.
Yeah.
Anyway. So that's new news for you, John. We're starting a whole new podcast.
You'll probably have to mute my chuckling there for a bit, but
nope,
no,
we're keeping
stays. The chuckling stays in. Chuckle harder.
I was really trying to stifle it because I feared you wouldn't want my audio on that. And
we can always silence you if we don't want to hear you.
We can fix it in post.
We got fix it in post options.
And fix it in post, which means we're just going to turn it up louder.
Yeah, we're just going to make your loud laugh. See,
just gonna loop my laughter.
Yeah, you're our laugh track. We need you to be laughing. I hope you haven't been stifling laughs this entire episode.
Oh, what have I done? No.
Fuck it. Hit reset. We're doing this all again.
All right. Sorry, John. We got to do the whole thing again. Welcome to Sneaky Geek, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to follow us on our socials. Join our Discord so that you can talk to us there about how much you absolutely loved this. If you love the show, tell your friends. If you hate the show, tell your enemies. Whatever, just tell somebody that this show exists. And then
our next show exists.
Go tell everybody that the Starlight Archive exists. There's a big thing, John, we didn't even tell you. There's this big station that's floating out in the frontier called the Starlight Beacon. And it's where it's got a Jedi temple on it. It's got it's basically the nice version of the Death Star, without a planet destroying weapon, but it's effectively a giant mobile city, and it's got an archive on it, and we named ourselves after that archive because Reith Silas loves that archive, and we love Reith Silas.
We do. He's a good dude.
Sounds like a good reason to me.
Anyway, so that's all the energy that I've been subduing this entire episode. I'm glad you guys got to hear me be hyper at the end of it. I'm just very excited about having this new podcast. I'm very excited.
We worked really hard on it.
We really have.
Yeah.
We've spent like there's Google Docs.
Yeah. There's note pages
shared
on note
notes.
pages.
Brian made a spreadsheet and docs and what do you call those? Word documents. I was supposed to be teaching math, and I was instead writing synopsis of books for our show notes. Kids' educations were sacrificed for this podcast. Damn it.
They hired a sub. You're fine.
It's true, honestly. They just wanted me to make sure that they didn't blow the classroom up. But I don't even sub for chemistry. So, joke's on them. My job's easy. Anyway, John.
Bryce.
You're a gentleman and a scholar.
An actual scholar.
In truly every sense of those words.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far.
Your knowledge is always very much appreciated. We'd love to have you back on to talk about kaiju. We'd love to talk to you about Star Trek, about Star Wars again. Anything, you are always welcome here. We just adore you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I love you guys too. It's been great getting to talk to you.
Yeah.
And glad I could pitch in on this podcast.
We are too.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening and getting this far. We hope that you had a good time. Let us know if you did. Let us know if you didn't. We'll see you next time.
And we'll see you on the Starlight Archive.
Yes, we will. Boom.
May the Force be with you always.
Sneaky Geek is hosted by Bryce Rankins and Brian Romero. This episode was edited by Bryce Rankins. Our logo and website were designed by Ali Nimmons. Our theme song was written and produced by Skylar Johnson. Copyright 2024, Sneaky Geek Media, all rights reserved. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, the Starlight Archive. Hosts Bryce Rankins and Brian Romero embark on a journey into the depths of Lucasfilm's multimedia storytelling initiative, the High Republic. Every week, they venture into uncharted territories of literature and comics, exploring the rich tapestry of this era with meticulous detail. The Starlight Archive, a new podcast brought to you from the people who brought you Sneaky Geek.